Washington, D.C. The heat that day was sweltering, and the political climate in the U.S. Capitol was even hotter. Camera lenses jostled for space in the packed briefing room, the rapid clacking of keyboards from the press seats filling the air. Everyone assumed the press conference would cover the usual topics: crime, the economy, maybe a few jabs at the current administration. But within minutes of Donald J. Trump taking the podium, every prediction proved wrong. The event instantly turned into a media storm, a social media wildfire, and endless late-night satire. Trump, with his signature blonde hair and a confidence tinged with swagger, opened smoothly with talk of reform and restoring order. But then came the fateful moment. "I'll be going to Russia this Friday to meet President Putin," he declared, a line that froze the press corps in their seats, some reporters glancing at each other as if to confirm they'd heard correctly. They had. Seconds later, Trump added, in Alaska, or Russia, Alaska. For CNN, that was all they needed. Live on air, they split the screen. Trump speaking on one side, a zoomed-in world map on the other, showing Alaska and Russia separated by the Bering Strait, captioned in bold, "Not the same place." The anchor smirked. "Mr. Former President, these are two different regions on two different continents, and you can't actually walk across them as you suggested." From Twitter, now X, to TikTok, the clips spread like wildfire. Hashtags Jocks Trump maps, Nyaks Bering blunder, and Kwash from Russia with oops shot up the trending charts. Memes showed Trump standing on a map wearing a Soviet pilot's cap captioned, "Alaska returning to Russia 2025 news bulletin." Opposition accounts called it a catastrophic strategic blunder, while loyalists shot back, "Just a slip of the tongue, the media's overblowing it." Before the public could finish laughing or fuming, Trump pivoted to crime in Washington, D.C. Waving a color-printed chart, he gestured at the bright red bars. "Crime is skyrocketing. D.C. needs to be cleaned up. We must bring in federal police immediately." His tone was severe, almost threatening, but CNN once again fact-checked him on the spot. The data was from 2023. In reality, FBI and D.C. police had just reported violent crime rates in 2025 at their lowest in 30 years, down 26% year over year and over 35% from the previous year. Immediately after, Mayor Muriel Bowser held her own press conference. Holding the latest reports, she declared, "Putting D.C. police under federal control is alarming, even dangerous. This is a blatant violation of the autonomy we've fought decades to secure." She hinted at possible legal action and urged Congress to step in. But the drama wasn't over. Trump closed by returning to foreign policy, specifically an upcoming meeting with Vladimir Putin. He called it a feel-out meeting and admitted it might go nowhere. "I'll know in the first 2 minutes whether we can make a deal," he said. For diplomats, this was unusual. Peace in Ukraine, a war that has taken tens of thousands of lives, decided in 2 minutes? In Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky called an emergency meeting with European leaders. Without Ukraine at the negotiating table, there will be no peace. In Brussels, Berlin, and Paris, EU leaders repeated the principle, borders cannot be changed by force. The Times reported concerns the Alaska summit could become a backroom deal favoring Russia and weakening the Western alliance. When it was over, CNN replayed the event, overlaying fact checks from the Alaska-Russia map to the crime stats to the 2-minute quote. On late night, Seth Meyers opened, "We just watched a marathon press conference packed with moments that could have been cut short, and it's embarrassing for all of us." He mocked Trump's depiction of D.C. as if lifted straight from Mad Max Fury Road and called breaking news. Just hours after the press conference, phones in Washington, Brussels, Kyiv, and Moscow began ringing off the hook. Messages from aides, briefing memos, and viral clips flooded in. The Alaska summit had already been a sensitive topic, but now, with Trump confuses Russia with Alaska in the mix, the whole world was puzzled. In Moscow, state TV replayed the exact moment Trump said Russia, complete with the host chuckling. One Russian commentator quipped, "Perhaps he's already ready to see Alaska as part of Russia again." In Kyiv, the reaction could not have been more different. Zelensky's team split into task forces, one to monitor every Trump remark, another to assess the real possibility of a land-for-peace deal. That night, Zelensky addressed the nation bluntly. "We will not accept any agreement without Ukraine's presence at the negotiating table. Our country is not a bargaining chip." The statement was immediately picked up by major international outlets, becoming a central piece of the story. Over in Brussels, EU leaders held an emergency video conference. The agenda was not just Ukraine's war, but how to prepare for a possible Trump return to the White House. with his unconventional views on NATO and Russia. An anonymous diplomat told The Guardian, if he's willing to confuse Alaska with Russia in front of the entire world, he could just as easily blur other diplomatic red lines, and that's even more worrying. Social media split into two streams. One side pumped out memes, parody videos, and photoshopped images of Trump on a map with a bridge drawn from Alaska to Moscow labeled Trump Highway. The other side produced lengthy political analyses, dissecting every word for clues about his true stance. Pro-Trump users shrugged it off as just a slip of the tongue, while critics called it a sign of recklessness and a lack of basic geographic knowledge. Major outlets like AP, The Washington Post, and the BBC launched fact checks. The BBC even produced a minute-by-minute fact-check video contrasting each Trump claim with hard data. The verdict: more than half of his statements about crime and homelessness in D.C. were false or misleading. This buried his policy message under a tidal wave of chatter about maps and math. Among political analysts, many called it a missed opportunity for Trump. What could have been a day to cement his tough-on-crime image and Project Foreign Policy confidence instead became a political variety show where every highlight worked against him. A former Republican strategist told Politico he handed the opposition an arsenal of memes and sound bites for the campaign. In the U.S., nightly talk shows feasted on the fiasco. Fox News downplayed it as a mispronunciation and pivoted to attacking media bias. MSNBC and CNN, however, replayed the fact-check segments, inviting criminologists and ex-FBI officials to dismantle Trump's data. Ratings soared every time they aired it, proof of the drama's draw. Domestically, Mayor Bowser capitalized on the moment to reinforce her image as the defender of D.C.'s autonomy. Her office blasted out fundraising emails with the line, "They want to take our power, and they're using fake numbers to do it." Democrats in Congress issued joint statements condemning Trump's remarks, while some Republicans stayed silent to avoid the fallout. Across the Atlantic, European papers framed it as textbook political theater. France's Le Monde wrote, "No one remembers exactly what Trump's policy plan was that day, but everyone remembers he confused Alaska with Russia." Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung mocked, "If geography were a test, today the former president would have failed." In Russia, Kremlin-friendly analysts relished the political storm. A Russia Today pundit said Trump might accidentally be helping us, just by sowing chaos in the opponent's ranks. Though by nightfall in D.C., the hashtags were still topping the charts. Alaskans began posting videos clarifying that they were, in fact, not Russia, complete with sweeping landscapes, salmon runs, and snowy peaks. One Anchorage restaurant even hung a sign, "Welcome President Trump to Russia, Alaska style," a cheeky local jab. All of this happened in under 24 hours, turning what could have been a routine press conference into a global political media spectacle. And with the Alaska summit fast approaching, observers predicted this was just the opening act in a saga where every Trump word would be parsed, second by second. In Trump's campaign, every televised moment is usually calculated for maximum attention. But this time, according to an anonymous advisor speaking to the Daily Beast, we did not plan for him to confuse Russia with Alaska. Right after the press conference, Trump's media team huddled in a hotel near the White House. The tension was so thick, one staffer said, you could hear a pin drop. Fierce arguments broke out over how to respond. One faction pushed to dismiss the incident entirely, calling it a tongue slip and insisting the focus return to the real issues, crime in D.C., and the weakness of the current administration. Another faction worried that if handled poorly, the blunder could become a symbol of Trump's inaccuracy in the eyes of swing voters. If we let the opposition define him as the guy who can't tell Alaska from Russia, we lose the national security argument, one insider said. While the campaign debated, Democrats struck first. They released a spliced video of the press conference, cutting Trump's Russia remark, together with footage of Putin smiling, ending with the line, "Would you trust this man with national security?" The ad spread rapidly on X and Instagram, especially among younger voters who consume most of their political news online. In battleground states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, both sides began testing new messaging. Trump's supporters leaned into the idea that he speaks plainly, unafraid of being twisted by the media, while opponents emphasized the image of a president who could spark a diplomatic crisis with a single mistake. Snap polls after the press conference showed little change among Republican voters, but among independents, trust in Trump's foreign policy judgment dipped slightly. The Alaska summit, already a high-stakes gamble, now carried the extra burden of proving Trump still had strategic chops on the global stage. According to The Washington Post, The plan was for Trump to meet Putin in a closed room in Anchorage, with no press and only a handful of senior advisors present. Leaked details suggested Trump's goal was vague: to explore whether Russia would accept a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine in exchange for some easing of Western sanctions. The risk was obvious. If the summit ended without concrete results, the 2 minutes to decide remark would be branded as impulsive and unplanned. On the other hand, if an agreement was reached, Trump could declare himself a peace broker, regardless of backlash from Ukraine and Europe. Western diplomats were alarmed. A NATO official told The Guardian he could sign a deal just to score a personal political win, without caring about the long-term consequences. In Kyiv, military strategists warned that any ceasefire leaving Russian troops on Ukrainian soil would simply give Moscow time to regroup. Ukraine's defense minister was blunt: "We do not need a deal for Russia to rest and return stronger." Meanwhile, social media kept the Russia-Alaska joke alive. Political YouTube channels live-streamed hours-long analyses of the press conference, speculating about Trump's Alaska strategy. Some right-wing streamers turned the mix-up into an inside joke, selling T-shirts printed with a map and the line, "I can see Russia from here," a throwback to Sarah Palin's infamous quote. International media began to ask, was this simply a media gaffe or part of Trump's deliberate shockwave politics to dominate headlines? A Financial Times journalist wrote, "Every time he misspeaks, the media pounces, and that's exactly how he controls the conversation. Good or bad, he keeps everyone talking about him." Behind the scenes, Trump's team adjusted course. They planned a long-form Fox News interview right before his departure for Alaska, aiming to explain the press conference and reinforce his policy message. National security advisors were told to prepare concrete proposals to avoid the summit being seen as pure improvisation. As the clock ticked down to the summit, the Russia-Alaska story seemed only to tighten its grip on public consciousness. As one MSNBC commentator joked, if he wanted the world to focus on the Alaska summit, congratulations, he succeeded, just not the way he intended. On the day of the Alaska summit, Anchorage was bitterly cold, the wind from the Chugach Mountains whipping against the faces of reporters camped outside the Hilton downtown. Security was airtight. Entire streets were cordoned off, every vehicle checked by sniffer dogs. From early morning, TV helicopters circled overhead, hoping to catch the motorcade of either Trump or Putin. Trump arrived first, wearing a dark overcoat, stepping out of an SUV to cheers from a small group of supporters gathered behind barricades. In contrast, when Putin's convoy rolled in, there were no cheers, just a wall of camera flashes. The two leaders shook hands in front of the cameras, a handshake firm enough for body language analysts to note neither wanted to appear weak. Inside the closed meeting room, there were only 6 people: Trump, Putin, 2 interpreters, and 1 senior advisor on each side. No recordings, no cameras. According to the Washington Post, the conversation began with polite greetings but quickly shifted to Ukraine. Trump opened, "I want peace, and I think we can achieve it quickly." Putin, smiling faintly, replied, "Peace is always good if the conditions are right." The two spent nearly 40 minutes discussing those right conditions. Russian officials reportedly proposed a ceasefire along the current front lines, essentially keeping the territory they already controlled.